Shalom from Yerushalayim. Welcome to our conversation with Rabbi Nir Barkin, Director of the Israel Diaspora Department of the Israel Reform Movement and leader of Project Domim Alike. Did I get that right?
Perfect.
Excellent. So I'm Rabbi Steve Burnstein, Director of the Anita Saltz Education Center of the World Union for Progressive Judaism. World Union represents some 2 million Reform, Progressive, Liberal Jews in about 50 countries around the world, and the Saltz Center is the educational arm of the World Union. We offer programs like this one in addition to intensive seminars here in Jerusalem and around the world, like the Butel Leadership Seminar, the Bergman Jewish Educator Seminar, the Roswell Social Justice Program, and many other exciting educational programs. We hope that you, your communities, and your congregations will join us, and you can contact the World Union office for details. But now to our conversation with Rabbi Nir. So, over the... Shalom, shalom.
Nice to be here.
Welcome.
I don't know if you know, Steve, but years and years ago, I was the first director of the Anita Saltz Education Center. So we have some ksharim, some connections here as well.
So, welcome home.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
So as with the World Union and the Saltz Center, over the past few years we've seen a lot of changes and a lot of growth with the IMPJ, with the Israel Reform Movement. More than doubling the number of congregations. Today, we just ended last week, I think, the summer camp with over 300 Israeli kids in Reform Jewish summer camps. It seems like our movement is getting stronger and stronger. What's the secret to our success?
Well, I think the secret is a joint work that is being done here in Israel, both by the WUPJ, the IMPJ, and the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute for Religion. The joint work is to create the infrastructure for sustainable communities here. Not only just having built new communities every year, but also the fact that new rabbis, Israeli rabbis, are being brought into the field and are being leading the new initiatives which are happening on the ground day in and day out is part of the success. In my personal belief, and I've seen it in the last 15 years here in Israel, is the leadership and the vision. If you would like to summarize two major things that make the difference here in Israel, and as you said, double the number of communities, is the vision and the leadership that takes us to that vision, to that horizon.
So some of the challenges that we face in the Israel movement are not any different than the challenges we face around our communities around the world, especially with our focus on youth and young adults. What are some of the initiatives happening in Israel now to address youth and young adults?
I think the answer has to be discussed in two major ways. The first one is, or the main approach, is the formal education, and the other one is the informal education. When it comes to formal education, as you said before, while we are having more and more communities, we're having more and more formal education frameworks within those communities, meaning preschool classes, early childhood classes, elementary schools which we are opening. We just are beginning our new class, which is going to be a new school in Holon, which is a new city which we entered 5 years ago, and we're celebrating now the opening of the school. The school which I led for about 8 years, the Yozma Elementary School, which was totally new 8 years ago, was nothing there on the ground, still a formal education which we decided to provide to the Israeli population. Parallel to that, and not any less important to that, is the informal education. And when it comes to informal education, we know it from studies, but we know it from facts and from the ground. We see how kids, young adults, and even older adults are interested more and more here in Israel in informal education. It goes to youth movement. We have more and more children going to youth movement, the Telem Noah youth movement. We have more and more children attend the annual summer camp. We have more and more children join the Mechina, the pre-army initiative, and other programs like that. Bringing just a personal testimonial from my son, who's 15 years old, my youngest son, he's 15 years old, and he just attended the 4th or 5th year of the summer camp and decided to join the Telem Noah youth movement. Why? Because it's fun. Why? Because they do things which connect them to who they are and bring everybody together. They feel less separated both from their counterparts, but also from the tradition and the values that we bring there.
Continuing with this line of the growth of the Reform movement in Israel, and my home congregation at Gezer, Kilat Birkat Shalom, under the leadership of Miri Gold, we've had a lot of success in the last few years. Miri, now one of a handful of Reform rabbis here in Israel receiving a state salary. Later this month, with the Chagim, we hope to be celebrating Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in our new building, built in part by funding from the Moetzah Azarית, from the regional council, the local government. Things like that 15, 20 years ago, we barely dreamed these would be possible. What are some of the big changes for the Reform movement on the horizon?
I think that the growth and the change that you're talking about is a change of grassroots. Things that are building from the bottom towards the top. We have our legal department, we have our leadership, lay and professional leadership, which are managing in a way to change the reality from the legal perspective, but also from the grassroots perspective. More and more Israelis, and when I'm talking about more and more Israelis, I'm talking about native Israelis, people who were born here, Sabras from Ashkenazi or Sephardi background, doesn't matter, who are finding the Reform movement as their home, as their synagogues, as their places that they go or sometimes don't go to pray at. But these are their homes. And from a very personal experience, starting with 120 families at the home synagogue that I belong to, Yozma in Modi'in, about 10 years ago, now we have 1,000 family congregation with a full elementary school, with 6 preschool classes. There is a demand on the ground in the Israeli society for more and more connection to the mindful Jewish approach, to the more liberal and egalitarian way of practicing Judaism. And we see them coming into our gates by the hundreds. It's no longer by the dozens. People are interested, people are getting married more and more with our rabbis, people are officiating their children's bar and bat mitzvahs with us. People come now to celebrate the Britot, Brit Milah, for their children in our synagogues. Things that, as you said before, 10 or 15 years ago were unheard of.
You know, another success, but kind of a success and a little bit sad. Right before Tisha B'Av, we had rabbis and leaders from Reform, secular, conservative, Orthodox coming together with Israeli President Reuven Rivlin with a study session. And right after that, we have our religious affairs minister, David Azulay, continuing to question the legitimacy of Reform Judaism, the Judaism of Reform Jews. How do we respond?
I think we have to separate between the two examples that you just brought. I attended the study session at the President's residence just before Tisha B'Av. It was a very impressive gathering. It was impressive from two perspectives. First, the people who were speaking there, including our Rabbi Meir Azavi, who gave a wonderful and very inspirational speech or a study session, a lesson. It was an inclusive place. It was getting the president's wings under his wings, and it felt good. I think President Rivlin himself made a huge step forward when he welcomed at that meeting, the four different denominations under his auspices. So this is one thing. So Reuven Rivlin, the president, is doing a huge milestone towards egalitarian or equality within the Israeli society. And when we're talking about the Minister of Religious Affairs in Israel, this is a whole different story, but serves us in the same way. Because whenever those speeches and I would say demolishing or attempts to delegitimize the reform movement in Israel is happening, I think it achieves the opposite. I think we're getting more and more of the Israeli public to come into our homes, into our synagogues, and say, we don't want that type of Judaism that the minister is representing. We would like something more tolerant, more beautiful, more musical that the reform movement in Israel is offering. So while these are very distinguished opportunities, very different one from another, having the president's support is wonderful, having the president inviting the leaders of the reform movement in Israel and outside of Israel to his residence and welcoming them on one hand, but on the other hand, even the bad examples that you were talking about are bringing more and more of the Israeli public into our synagogues.
Yeah. It was, the whole incident really for me highlighted to the Israeli public some of the wonderful work that we're doing, especially looking at our work and the work of the conservative movement with the special needs children, providing bar bat mitzvah ceremonies for these children. It also reminds me of going with Kilat Yozma from Modi'in to Beit Eden in Ramla, and on a weekly basis bringing the beauty of Shabbat to this special needs community, and the love and the caring of the volunteers from the Yozma community who were connected. It reminds me of the Civil Rights March in Selma, when Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was asked after his participation in the march, did he have an opportunity to pray much when he was in Selma? And he said that he was praying with his feet. And it seems to me that the IMPJ, that the Israel Reform Movement, is really praying with its feet in Israeli society, working towards tzedek chevrati and tikkun olam.
Definitely. I don't want to underestimate the praying in the synagogue, because this is also something which is kind of new for the secular Israeli population. So while this is something which we are developing and promoting and thinking that spirituality at large has to be part of Israeli life, in our model, we also pray with our feet. We also pray in our feet with some good and some sad examples. The sad example is the gay parade which we were part of a few weeks ago, and ended up with a murder and some horrible injuries for some of the participants. The Reform Movement marched there with its feet, supporting and not only showing that we are part of it as much as we would like to express our unity with all human beings. And the fact is that a lot of our members in the various communities not only attended the march, the parade, but also came later on to the various demonstrations against the hatred and the murder. This is just one example, but we have many others. We have social justice programs when it comes to our neighbors and our Arab residents of the country. We have a project which is called Shchenim, neighbors, in which our communities are getting together with their Shchenim, their neighbors, within their areas, and starting a dialogue. Not only starting, already continuing a dialogue which started a few years ago. This is part of our main agenda these years. But as you know, from your community, you've been dealing with prisoners over the years in Ramle, in the prison there, in the jail there. Other kehilot, other communities are dealing with single mothers and their children in the process of divorce or process of separating supporting both the children and the single parent that is remained behind. We're very active, as you can imagine, with everything that has to do with egalitarian and equality when it comes to men and women in front of God and in front of the people. So we do both. We do pray in the synagogues, but we also pray with our feet, as Heschel has been doing with Selma.
So here we are, hard to believe, we're already in the month of Elul, preparing for the Chagim, for the High Holy Days. What are some of the exciting initiatives taking place this year in our communities around Israel?
First, it has to be said that we are going to have more than 50 minyanim, 50 gatherings, among them very big ones, with thousands of people in Beit Daniel, in Mevaseret Zion, in Jerusalem, in Modi'in, but also with minyanim, which has lesser number of people, but are very important for us. In the last few years, there is a growing process of kibbutzim, which are asking the Reform movement to send a spiritual leader to lead the minyan during the high holidays, during the Chagim. This is a new thing. This is something which, for I would say 70 or almost 100 years, did not happen in Israel. If we're going back to the studies that were explored by the Midrashayim Oranim 20 years ago by Dr. Meir Zeira, and we find out that, you know, in the 1920s, when the first kibbutzim were established with people who had strong Jewish background, they were practicing something which were counter to what they grew up in. Meaning, everything that they knew from Europe or North Africa, they acted totally opposite to. And what we're seeing in the last, I would say, 5, maybe less years, is the coming back. But when they come back to tradition, when they want to practice, they would like to practice the liberal Judaism. They would like to match, as most secular Israeli, they would like to match their natural life, their day-to-day life with their spiritual life. Not separated, not say, in the synagogue I will be Orthodox, my wife will sit behind the mechitza, and during the daily life I will practice egalitarian and normal life. No, we want it both in the synagogue and outside the synagogue. And when they're starting to have this trend, this progress into going back into the synagogues, they're asking the Reform rabbis to officiate the high holidays in the kibbutzim. And this is just one example of many that is happening nowadays. Another very good example is our penetration into Ashdod, for instance. Ashdod is a city which we did not have a community before, but as the high holidays are approaching, we get a request from members of the Kehillah, of people in Ashdod, which are interested more and more in having prayers in a liberal approach and the way we can bring it. So we're going to have a minyan during the high holiday in Ashdod and many others. Not to say the minyanim that we can offer these days in Ramat Gan or in Haifa for new immigrants from the former Soviet Union and examples like this.
That's great. When you were talking about our impact on the kibbutzim, it reminds me when Zichrono Livracha, when my father-in-law died, my in-laws lived on kibbutz Barkai, Shmutznik, the Shomer Tzair kibbutz, where, you know, the urban myth is that on Yom Kippur they would dafka bring in pork, right? Because they were praying with their feet by working the land and creating the new Jew and rejecting the traditional Judaism that they knew.
Yes.
And when my mother-in-law asked me to lead the Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish, at the funeral, afterwards, during the Shiva, there was a line of people waiting to come, some of them visibly upset. How can you bring right, prayer onto our kibbutz, and other people moved that we had men and women together saying the Kaddish, and having their eyes opened to the beauty of progressive and egalitarian Judaism, beginning to realize, as you said, that the Judaism they rejected isn't the only option out there.
Yeah. I would like to add to that, which answering your previous question about progresses in the Israeli society, I think that it is more seen these days that the progress that the reform movement has been doing in Israel for the last 50 years, not just the last 10 years, is now entering and bringing the Orthodox world into a more egalitarian and more liberal ways of practicing. I think that we find more and more egalitarian Orthodox synagogues nowadays in Israel than we had ever. And I see it as a direct result of the reform movement's work in Israel, pulling the string to the max, to trying to maximize the opportunity for every human being here in Israel to approach Judaism in a liberal way, and forcing the non-liberal communities to walk in that way as well.
You know, it's I'm smiling now as I'm thinking of Rabbi Richard Hirsch, who first head of the World Union, and instrumental in seeding the Israel movement for progressive Judaism, who I've heard him countless times talk about the role of Reform Judaism in Israel is to bring Judaism and the values of Reform Judaism outside of the synagogue, and so that they can have a greater impact on Israeli society.
Absolutely.
And it seems like
it may go back to the question you asked before about President Rivlin and the Minister of Religion. They have to react to us. They cannot ignore us anymore. And as more and more Israeli-born rabbis are leading the congregations in the field and feeling very comfortable about who they are and about what they're doing, I think that both the politicians as well as the people in the street cannot ignore the revolution. It's not a evolution anymore. It's literally a revolution on the ground.
So, you've got a new role now with the Israel Reform Movement, Director of Israel Diaspora, the Israel Diaspora Department, and the project Domim Alike. So tell us about this position.
Up until 13 weeks ago, I was one of the two rabbis at Kehilat Yozma in Modi'in. Now I lead this new initiative, the Israel Diaspora Initiative in the movement, in the IMPJ. By itself, a breaking through the relationship between, a breakthrough in the relationship between the Israeli government and the reform movement in Israel. This is a joint program by the government and the Israeli reform movement. It's funded partially by the government, partially by the movement, and the whole idea is to strengthen and make tighter and stronger relationships between communities and leadership outside of Israel and Israel, putting everybody within the reform movement around the world in the same pile, in the same field of connections, and understanding that most of what we have, other than our single communities where we live, is our togetherness, is who we are vis-a-vis each other. You look at me and say, wow, I'd like to learn from them, and them would like to learn from each other. That's the project, trying to bring everybody together. In the old days we called it twinning or matching or connecting. Nowadays we try to put it under one auspices and say, let's come together and strengthen the relationships between Jews who live in Israel and Jews who live outside of Israel as equals, as people who have something to contribute to each other, that has such a heavy and good load on their side that they can share it with others. That is a project that we started just 12 weeks ago, and already has 110 overseas communities involved in that, with 30 communities in Israel which are part of it. We are already at 150% of the capacity of the project at this time. We are hoping, and I hope that you're going to ask me something about what our counterparts overseas can contribute to the program. First, I'd like to invite them to join the program, as I have stated it in the WUPJ magazine this past week. But I would like them also to understand that this program is bringing a new idea to the field, and the idea is the approach that we can contribute to each other. Sometimes ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, and sometimes ki mi Sydney tetzeh Torah, or from Brazil tetzeh Torah,
Or Shanghai.
or Shanghai, the new synagogue which you just sent a Torah scroll in the last Connections conference in Brazil. We would like to find out more and more communities everywhere in the world connecting with each other when Israel is part of it, and Israel has the dynamics of opening its homes and hearts for a project of this kind.
Yafeh. And I know that there's also the Yachdav project. We just a few weeks ago had our Bergman Jewish Educators Seminar, where we had participants from 12 different countries, Jewish educators coming together in Israel for a professional development program. And they met with Hila Lahar about opportunities for schools outside of Israel to partner with schools here in Israel, progressive reform schools, and develop a relationship.
As I stated before, it's not an evolution, it's a revolution. It's a tornado of programs. Yachdav is a fascinating program that connects both formal and informal schools in Israel with formal and informal schools outside of Israel, not only within the reform movement. We have schools in Israel all over the country, including the very periphery of the country, of the state of Israel, and they're connected with day schools and with elementary schools and supplementary schools all over the world. This is a very important and strong program because it starts at the very beginning, not just with the leadership as the program that I lead is doing, but also starts with children in the very early stages of their life, and it can impact their lives, I think, forever.
Any other ways that our friends around the world can get involved, can be part of this magnificent journey and the tremendous growth and success of the reform movement here in Israel?
Absolutely, yes. If I may, Steve, I'd like to launch at this broadcast for the first time the Diaspora Israel holiday. Now you ask me, what is the Diaspora Israel holiday? And I'll tell you that today it doesn't exist, but within 5 or 10 years from now, people will say, oh, of course, we celebrated it 50 or 100 years ago. My great-grandparents celebrated it overseas. It will be so natural. So the Israel Diaspora, or the Diaspora Israel Day, we call it in Hebrew, Yom Tfutzot Israel. Yom Tfutzot Israel, which will be celebrated on the 7th of the month of Cheshvan, the day that the Olei Regel, the pilgrimage, who came to Jerusalem in the very old days, in the days of the Mishnah and the Talmud, were returning to Bavel. And now that they're back in their homes, we can start praying for rain that doesn't catch them during their journey back home. So on the 7th of the month of Cheshvan, Yom Bakashat Al-Shamim, the day of requesting, asking for rain, we are going to launch this year in 5776, this coming year, we are going to launch this new holiday in the Jewish calendar, which will be celebrating the wealth of the Jewish diaspora and the connections between different Jewish diasporas diasporas all over the world with Israel and with the people who live here, and we will celebrate something which does not exist at the moment. The fascinating fact that for 6,000 years, this tribe, the Jewish nation, is living all over the world, everywhere, and still, up until this coming year, did not have a holiday to celebrate the fact that we are all over. That while we're residents of many countries, many continents, we have so much in common, and for thousands of years we are maintaining our tradition. This is a reason for celebration, and my team and I are creating right now the Haggadah for that particular day that will have or will include not only texts and study, but also a meal, a festival, because we in the Jewish tradition like to celebrate with a festival, with a festivity, with a meal. And we will have webinars like we do right now, all over the world, celebrating Yom Tfutzot Israel, the day of the diasporas of Israel, on the 7th of Heshvan.
Yefet. Well, I'm looking forward to being part of that celebration.
Thank you very much.
Nir, thank you very much on behalf of the World Union. And thank you and the IMPJ for the tremendous work that you're doing. And Toda Rabba.
Toda Rabba lecha.
And Chag Sameach. להתראות.
להתראות.